From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And coming up today, K-State's Jane Lingenfelser is back to report on the top-performing hybrids in K-State's 2021 Grain Sorghum Performance Test. Those results are now available to you growers, and she'll also pass along the standout hybrids in K-State's Oilseed Sunflower Performance Test this past year. Then, over from the Farm Service Agency State Office, Todd Barrows will cover several timely items of interest to you Kansas agricultural producers. That'll include a look at the opportunities for relief for those of you hard hit by last month's wildfires. And on this week's edition of Milk Lines, K-State's Mike Brouk will talk about managing the dry period of dairy cows. All that coming up on this Agriculture Today. Glad to have you along once more for another Agriculture Today. Well, we need to get you grain sorghum producers caught up on the results that are just now posted on Grain Sorghum Hybrid Performance from K-State's trials in 2021. Eagerly awaited information as you will eventually go about your seed selection for 2022 production. And joining us once more, the agronomist in charge of K-State's crop performance tests, Jane Lingenfelser, passing along the data here. And Jane, to point out the results are out there. They can be accessed by producers anytime now, right?
That's right. The results are almost complete and can be found at the Crop Performance Test website. That address is agronomy.ksu.edu/services/crop-performance-tests. And the annual publication will be printed by the KSRE Printing Services and will be available in local extension offices. An electronic copy of the book will also be available from the K-State Research and Extension Digital Library, and that address is www.ksre.ksu.edu/bookstore/crops.
Multiple ways of getting to the data, and we'll repeat those for you. But before we talk of the standout hybrids for grain sorghum as well as sunflowers, which we'll touch upon in a moment as well, as you typically do, you pull together notes on those hybrids that stood out among the others at the various field sites.
Yes, I'll just mention a few hybrids that did well in the individual locations. This year we saw the highest yields ever in some irrigated tests, contrasted by dryland fields that had to be abandoned from flooding, drought, or complete lack of uniformity, meaning that the weather had much more influence than genetic differences in hybrids. I won't be sharing the results from Parsons, the dryland test at Hutchinson and Colby and Garden City for these reasons. And this is by no means an exhaustive list. The complete results can be found, again, at agronomy.ksu.edu/services/crop-performance-tests. And I'd like to also say thanks to Pioneer and Monsanto for providing the maturity check hybrids again this year.
All right, well, let's take a quick walking tour through the test sites and the results at those sites, starting with the dryland tests in northeast Kansas. You had 3 locations that came through.
Yes, we had Manhattan in Riley County. The average in Manhattan was 137 bushels. And hybrids that did well in Manhattan, Dynagrow M67 GB87, DeKalb DKS 4523, and Polanski 5719 did well. We had a test at Belleville in Republic County. The average there was 139 bushels. And hybrids that did well, Advanta ADV G3127, DeKalb DKS 4523 again, Dynagrow M67 GB87, and M72 GB71 did well in Belleville. We also had Beloit in Mitchell County. The average there was only 87 bushels. Beloit was very wet at planting and was followed by hot, dry weather, and so some crusting did occur. But hybrids that did well at Beloit, DeKalb DKS 4523 again, also Dynagrow M59 GB94, and Dynagrow M63 GB78 did well at Beloit.
As for southeast Kansas dryland production, well, there's the key. It wasn't such dry land, and that did, in fact, wipe out a test.
Yes, we lost Parsons in Labette County, which was drowned out, but we had Ottawa in Franklin County. The average yield at Ottawa was 149 bushels, and hybrids that did well in Ottawa, DeKalb DKS 3816 did well, also Dynagrow M67 GB87, and our early maturity check from Pioneer did well in Ottawa.
As for central Kansas test sites then, well, once more you were down to one location because of adverse conditions at the other.
Yes, we had Assaria in Slade County, which did very well this year. The average overall was 181 bushels. And hybrids that did well in Assaria, the medium maturity check from Pioneer did well. Also, Advanta ADV G2177IG. Also, Sorghum Partners SPS 344 and SPSC 343 did well in Assaria. Our location in Hutchinson in Reno County did have to be abandoned due to drought conditions.
Just the opposite problem of the Parsons site there. Western Kansas, your dryland sites, once more, a couple of those took a hit, but you did have some data come through.
Yes, we lost Colby in Thomas County and Garden City in Finney County. Both those had to be abandoned due to drought conditions and lack of uniformity. But we had Hayes in Ellis County. The overall yield at Hayes was 139 bushels, and the hybrids that did well, an experimental from Polanski, it's X65R D14IG, Dynagrow M54GR24, and Advanta ADV G2193IG did well in Hayes. We also had a dryland test in Tribune that I do not have available right now.
That data will be coming forth shortly from the Tribune site. And the irrigated sites, not just western Kansas, but one location in south central Kansas as well.
Yes, we had Hutchinson in Reno County. The overall yield in Hutchinson was 114 bushels, and if you say that's not very good yields for an irrigated site, keep in mind that the rest of the field had to be abandoned due to drought conditions, so pretty stressful conditions in Hutchinson this year. But hybrids that did well, Dynagrow GX 20998 did well, also DeKalb DKS 4523. Also, our early maturity check from Pioneer did well. We also had Colby in Thomas County. The average yield for Colby was 209 bushels, and hybrids that did well, DeKalb DKS 5353, DKS 4523, and DKS 3816 all did well in Colby. Also, our early maturity check from Pioneer did well again. We also had Garden City in Finney County. The average there was 117 bushels, and hybrids that did well, Dynagrow GX20970 and Sorghum Partners SP68M57 did well in Garden City. We also had a test at Tribune that I do not have available today.
And once more, that data from Tribune will be forthcoming soon. So those were some of the standout hybrids among many that were evaluated in the K-State Crop Performance Test in 2021. But Jane, you did want to mention as well K-State's Oilseed Sunflower Hybrid Tests. If you would briefly pass along some of the standout hybrids in the sunflower tests this year.
Yes, we had a test at Ashland Bottoms in Riley County. The overall yield for Ashland Bottoms was 1,174 pounds per acre. And the hybrids that did well at Ashland, S&W Seed SF440 did well. Also New Seed N4H422, Cropland CP7919, and an experimental from Dynagrow. It was XH81H52CP did well in Ashland Bottoms.
You had a site in south central Kansas as well.
Yes, we had Hutchinson in Reno County. The overall average there was 1,227 pounds per acre. And hybrids that did well, Cropland CP7919 and CP455E did well. Also, New Seed N4H470 did well in Reno County. We did have dryland tests in Parsons, which had to be abandoned for excess precipitation, and the test at Colby dryland had to be abandoned for drought situations. But we also had Colby irrigated in Thomas County, and the overall average was 3,351 pounds per acre. And the hybrids that did well at the Colby irrigated test, New Seed N4H521 and Falcon did well, and also Cropland CP455E did well in Colby.
Again, check out those oilseed type sunflower hybrid performance numbers in the report that K-State has put together on 2021 test production. But Jane, for sunflowers, for grain sorghum, it's a great resource for producers to lean on as they make hybrid selections for these two crops, and it's just part of the data you'd like producers to review.
That's right. I've only mentioned a very small portion of the information that is available, and I would encourage sorghum and sunflower producers to research hybrids of interest and see how those did in the trials that are closest to their own management and environmental conditions. The complete results are available, again, at agronomy.ksu.edu, and the printed copies of the 2021 Kansas Performance Test with grain sorghum hybrids and sunflower hybrids will be available later this month and will be in local extension offices after that.
All right. Well, Jane, again, great work on the part of you and your team in conducting not only these, but all of the crop performance tests for 2021. Looking forward to the next go-round in 22. It'll start relatively soon, amazingly enough.
Well, thanks as always for having me.
Thank you for being along with us and passing along highlights from the K-State grain sorghum and sunflower performance tests here this past year. Jane Lingenfelser is the agronomist in charge of K-State's crop performance tests. We'll be back with more on Agriculture Today. Agriculture Today continues now. It's our time set aside every other week to fill you in on the latest from the Farm Service Agency, state headquarters here in Kansas. And over from the FSA office is Farm Program Chief Todd Barrows. Todd, welcome.
Yeah, Eric, it's always great to come over and talk about programs that we have available going on right now, and probably our most popular program, and that's the ARC PLC program.
Mm-hmm. A mainstay of the safety net mechanism for producers.
Absolutely. And in Kansas right now, just looked at a report this morning, we are 42% enrolled for the 2022 program year. In comparison, we usually run about 99.8% enrollment participation. So we have a ways to go, and that's why I wanted to bring it up. While the enrollment period doesn't end until March 15th, that date will be here before you know it. So with that, if you have not already completed your enrollment for the 2022 crop year, then I would encourage you to contact your local county FSA office to begin that process. Don't wait till the last minute. Being proactive and starting now will ensure plenty of time for obtaining all necessary signatures, whether that be operator or landowner, and supporting documentation by the enrollment deadline.
So get that taken care of if you've not squared away your ARC PLC status. This for crops to be harvested in the 2022 cropping year. So keep that in mind, March the 15th. Let's talk about an event that strafed parts of Kansas in the middle part of December, those devastating wildfires and the losses suffered by producers there. There is assistance available.
Yeah, Eric, I wanted to bring this up, and what a devastating event it was for those affected. And I wanted to talk about this just because we got some very important deadlines for benefits that are applicable to those producers coming up very here in the near future. You know, FSA did participate with our sister agency, NRCS, and others at a producer meeting on December the 29th in Natoma, Kansas, to go over program options on a general basis and start to set the ball rolling, so to speak, on what is available for assistance to producers out there. With that, I want to come back now and remind producers of a couple important deadlines. both under our Livestock Indemnity Program and the Emergency Livestock Assistance Program, because those are coming up here very shortly.
And start with that LIP program, if you will, for short. Somewhat familiar with that because it's been employed before here in Kansas.
Yeah. Producers may have had a previous exposure to the Livestock Indemnity Program, or what we commonly refer to the LIP program, because it does provide benefits to livestock owners that have suffered death losses in excess of normal mortality due to an eligible adverse weather event. And certainly those strong extreme winds and the wildfires were definitely a weather event, qualifying weather event. So the first step is for producers on LIP is filing a notice of loss, which must be filed in the county where the disaster event occurred by at least one person who has an ownership share interest in those deceased livestock no later than January the 14th of 2022. And the reason why we say January the 14th is the deadline is because the federal regulations say it has to be filed within 30 days from the disaster event, and the wildfire occurring on December 15th, 30 days gets us to this Friday, January the 14th of 2022. The second step in that process then is filing an application for payment, which must be filed by all producers who have an ownership interest in the affected livestock or deceased livestock no later than March 1 of 2022. The payment is calculated by taking the number of deceased animals minus normal mortality and paying on the balance by kind, type, class of animal times the share of ownership. But I want to back up and be perfectly clear. As the notice of loss, the deadline is January the 14th, and that needs to be filed by one person that has an ownership share interest, while all people with ownership interest has to file the application for payment. So you could have multiple applications for payment tied to one notice of loss.
Very good. And, of course, the returns that were provided to producers under this program for those who qualify, established ahead of time by type and class of animal.
That's correct. And that's established at the national office. It's based on a 75% value of the average price from that National Ag Statistical Service comes up with for those animals. And so it's a set rate for everybody nationwide.
That, again, is the Livestock Indemnity Program. But on top of that, there's the additional potential aid here in the form of the Emergency Livestock Assistance Program.
Right. And that's the program that producers may not be as familiar with, is that Emergency Livestock Assistance Program, or we call it ELAP for short. And under that program, there's a couple of different areas that would potentially could provide aid to producers that they need to be aware of. One of those is for loss of harvested or purchased livestock feed or feedstuffs. And the second one is for purchase of additional livestock feed or feedstuff to maintain that herd, that grazing animal herd, until the next available grazing season. So let's break that down. Under the loss of harvested or purchased livestock feed or feedstuffs, there's a couple of important bullet points that I need to make. When we talk about harvested, it has to be mechanically harvested or mechanically harvested purchased feed supplies. We only pay assistance on replacement costs up to the grazing livestock nutrient needs till the next grazing season. So we're going to look at your grazing livestock numbers on hand at the time of the storm to determine what their nutrient value is as a hold down factor for your loss. And then we're going to look at also purchased feed lost must provide original receipts from the vendor. And then finally, I want to mention that for mechanically harvest production, you also must provide some type of record or documentation of that feed loss that is acceptable to your local county committee. Under purchases of additional livestock feed or feedstuff, it's very important that you provide the receipts of feed purchases for the current year due to the disaster wildfire. Plus, you're going to have to provide your purchase inventory of feedstuffs during the same time frame in the previous 2 years, because we truly only can pay assistance on what was additional purchases because of the wildfire. So both of these that we've talked about, either the loss of harvested or purchased feedstuffs or the purchase of additional feedstuffs, there is a notice of loss that must be filed within 30 days of the disaster event. So again, we're talking by January the 14th. But on the ELAP program, your application for payment must be by January the 30th of 2022. Now, keep in mind, when we're talking about additional feed purchases, realizing there may be some additional feed purchases necessary, or probably will be, after that January 30th date. So you producers, if you fall into that category, you will need to file an additional application for payment in the 2022 program year for that additional feed purchases that get you to the next grazing season.
Those are the particulars on the Emergency Livestock Assistance Program. And with those reminders in mind, producers, of course, Todd, can flesh out the details as they might apply to their situations with their local FSA staff. That's always recommended.
Absolutely. It's always recommended that producers, with their particular details, particular questions to their operation, reach out to the local service centers, FSA, NRCS, and discuss their situations that apply to them to get further clarifications. And to wrap things up today, Eric, I just had a couple of final points I would like to make. If you as a producer did unfortunately suffer losses to fences or need fence rehabilitation due to the wildfires, check with your local service centers, both FSA and NRCS, for program availability to help with funding of that. And you need to discuss those possibilities before you start any of that fence rehabilitation work out there on your farm. Mm-hmm. Get the process started first before that rehabilitation of that fence work. And finally, for those devastated by livestock losses, funding is also available for those of you that need assistance with burial costs for those deceased animals. And that's through our NRCS partner, our sister agency. Be sure to reach out to the NRCS leaders at your local office to check about funding availability for burial assistance if that is a need.
Very well. Todd, thank you for the important word right here. Appreciate you coming over.
It's always a pleasure to come over, Eric, and share with the listeners, because truly we want them to be aware of these tools that are available to them.
Todd Barrows, he's the Farm Program Chief with the Farm Service Agency State Headquarters for Kansas. We'll be back with more on the K-State Radio Network. Welcome back to Agriculture Today, and for you dairy producers, it's time once more for another edition of Milk Lines. K-State's Mike Brouk standing by. Mike, this week lending several thoughts on managing the dry period of individual cows in the herd and how that ultimately influences the lactation performance that follows. Mike?
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy producers concerning our animals that we're holding pre-fresh, and the success of those that freshen and reach peak milk production. You know, as we look at the success of the dairy farm, a lot of it does actually occur in these 5 to 6 weeks right around freshening, before and just after the animal calves. You know, as I look at many pieces of data, there's lots of interesting things that have been said about how we're successful. One of the first things that we often talk about is what is the length of the dry period. You know, we've always used 60 days as the average length for the dry period. But really, as we look at our herd, we've got a variation in those dry length days. The reason for that is we generally always dry animals on the same day of the week. So, as you're looking at your herd and deciding who you're going to dry off, a lot of us will look at that and they'll say, well, which animals do we need to dry off this week that would fall in that range of 54 to 60 days. assuming that if they stayed in our lactation pens for another week, they would be more than 60 days dry. Is that really what we want? As you look at that, you might want to dig back in your records and just look at how animals perform based on the number of days dry. And you might want to break that down a little bit further. You might want to look at animals that were dried off after their first lactation versus those dried off after their second lactation, as well as those third and greater lactation. You know, as you break that data down, it may seem that some of those animals need to have a little different dry period than the normal 60 days. And a lot of times what you need to look at is those animals that are third and greater lactation. Do they benefit from just a few more days dry? Should your target for those animals be 60 to 66 days rather than the 54 to 60 days that we normally use? You might want to take a look at that in your records and see what you come up with. Second thing as we look at success of these animals is how long they stay in that close-up pen, the pre-fresh pen. You know, normally we say 21 days, and for many animals that does work well. But as you start to dig into that, you may notice something. You may notice that cows, animals that are in their second or greater lactation, maybe they can get by with just a few days shorter in that transition pen. Heifers, probably at least 21 days. But maybe some of those animals that are in their second and third lactation, maybe we can get by with as few as 18 days in there. But what if she's having twins? Maybe some good data out there that shows us that twins should maybe be in that transition pen for at least 28 days. Again, they may calve early, and that may be the reason we need to consider to putting those in that transition a little bit sooner. Now, here's the real thing. As we look at success in this transition, it's just our stocking densities in the pre-fresh pen. Because of our time breeding programs, a lot of times we have slugs of animals that are coming through there. So if you're on a bedded pack, you still need 50 to 60 square feet of bedding per animal, and you still need 30 inches of bunk space. So now, as you look at overcrowding in this area, you may need to adjust how many days animals are going to be in there, keeping in mind that we might be able to cheat a little bit on cows, but maybe not on the heifers. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to take a look at their dry data and see how that impacts the next lactation.
All right, Mike, many thanks. And before we go, again, for you dairy operators, we would encourage you to check out the information that K-State Research and Extension has on dairy facility improvement at the Animal Sciences and Industry Department website. Go to asi.ksu.edu, click on the Extension tab and then the Dairy tab to access all of that. And our time's away once more. Thanks for tuning in. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.